Good evening and a happy new year. Tonight we're discussing the tumultuous events in Bolivia over the last 14 months that first saw a US-backed military coup against the President Evo Morales in November 2019, followed less than 12 months later by the socialist presidential candidate Luis Arce being swept to power in an election landslide on the 18th of October last year. The movement towards socialism in Bolivia prevailed against what seemed like impossible odds to secure an historic and incredibly inspirational victory. The obstacles we're confronted with in the UK pale in comparison to those faced by socialists in Bolivia, which should give us hope for the future, I think. So to discuss what happened and what lessons the British left can draw from the Bolivian experience, I'm delighted to welcome Ollie Vargas, who's been reporting on the ground in Bolivia from the very start of these momentous events. So welcome to you, Ollie. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Can you just perhaps open up really by telling us how the movement towards socialism in Bolivia managed to prevail against those what seemed like impossible odds, as I've said?
Thank you so much for having me on, Chris. I'm a big admirer of yours. I interviewed you once a couple of years ago when I worked at Socialism English in Ecuador.
Yes.
I've always, but yeah, I think it's important to be discussing these things, and I'm glad we're doing so on Resistance TV, because I think the movement towards socialism was a party that this time last year was being persecuted out of existence. It was practically a criminal offense to be associated with that party. However, now it's in a position where it's the only political party in the country with standing candidates in every province, in every constituency. The right-wing pro-coup parties that were so powerful at this time last year can't even cobble together their own alliances to be able to stand candidates everywhere. So how has it come to this? Well, this past year, I've been lucky enough to, witness this extraordinary transformation. But in reality, the mass never died. Even though there was the coup and there was the strength of the persecution, the mass they were never able to sweep away the movement towards socialism, because it was more than a political party. It was a coalition of different popular movements, grassroots movements. So even if you persecute one person, take them out, criminalize certain leaders, the party was something that existed physically in every single region, every single province of the country. So how can you sweep that away? So the way the mass is built is not as a...
Oh, you're frozen for a moment there. No, that's unfortunate. We've lost Ollie momentarily. I don't know if you can hear me, Ollie, but we can't hear you now. Let me see if I can. Guys, is there anything we can do? Oh,
hello. Hello, sorry.
We lost you there. We're just about to go to our technical. Let's see if we can get you back. You come back now anyway.
Sorry, the perennial problem.
Carry on. Yeah.
I was just going to say that the movement towards socialism is not a party that one can join as an individual. Its membership is one joins by being affiliated to your union, whether that be as in the rural areas or trade unions in the urban areas. And through joining your union, you're automatically a member of the mass, of the movement towards socialism. So people don't see it as a party that's coming into their areas and asking for their vote, promising, certain things, a shopping list of policies. What they see is that it's their party. They are the party. Yeah. It's not a party that speaks for people. It's a party that is them. And that's how it was created originally in the 1990s by Evo Morales. Evo Morales was a union leader in the Tropic of Cochabamba. And there was a debate in the movement at the time. We have these incredibly strong unions, but how do we move the struggle beyond that? And he said, it's not enough to just protest against, X, Y, and Z, this issue or another issue. We have to actually take power on our own terms, and it has to be ourselves that take power, not just in our community, but at a national level. And that was the argument that he took at the time. And not everyone was convinced. A lot of, there were some sections of the movement that thought that it should be, for example, a purely indigenous party. Evo Morales said that, we have the capacity to unite the whole country, all of the popular social forces behind us. We should try to do that, to be able to have a national reach. And so it was moving from the union struggle, the trade union struggle, into the political struggle, which is what defines the mass. And that's what made it so strong. And when there was the coup and Evo Morales was sent into exile, key leaders were jailed, some people were killed. For a normal political party, that might have destroyed it, a political party that depends on a few people. But this is a party that existed as a physical thing in every community, in every workplace, both rural and urban. So no one could sweep that away. And as the year went on, that force sort of snowballed in especially the younger sections of the population. A lot of young people that grew up during Evo Morales' period and were never part of the social struggles that brought him to power, who at the time of the coup maybe didn't consider themselves political or weren't too interested, or saw the social struggle as a history of something their parents did, were now thrown in to what was an awful situation, but also a necessity to fight back. And people became engaged with their unions once again, and through that to the party. So it was that combination of struggle on the ground with electoral work, the union struggle and the political struggle, welded together as one. That's what was really successful in Bolivia.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Ollie, because some people, some of the media commentators and many people indeed on the left in this country, and certainly inside the Labour Party, are sort of characterising the success of the socialists as a purely successful electoral strategy. That it was socialist, an electoral strategy, sent the kind of extreme far-right fascist party, essentially, bordering on that anyway, that was installed with the help of the US. But from what you're saying there, it's a lot more than just simply an electoral strategy. It very much, isn't it, that sense of a movement that actually made the success possible. I mean, do you think that success would have been possible if they just simply focused on an electoral strategy?
Well, absolutely not. And throughout Bolivian history, there's been a number of left-wing parties, a number of socialist parties, communist parties, Marxist parties. Some of them managed some degree of success. Many of them had very good politics, very good ideas, but they were never able to actually win a majority in the country. They're never able to cut out of certain social circles, because when you create a party that's focused purely on elections, who are the kinds of people that normally set up a party like that? Who are the kinds of people that run a party like that? Well, it's a certain section of the sort of middle class intellectuals, and they may have a degree of success in breaking into certain sections of the media. They may have very good ideas. But when you create a party based purely on an idea of something that should be done, what you're doing then is you're going out to the rest of the country and asking them, we'll be the people to represent you. Put your trust in us, and we'll go, to the capital and do these things for you. It's not something that's coming organically out of working class communities. And the only way that you can come organically from working class rural communities is by, being part of the long struggles that have existed in Bolivia and other countries. The MAS specifically was built out of the struggle in the Tropic of Cochabamba, which is a coca growing region. And there was a number of US military bases, DEA military bases. And there was a brutal struggle for control of land against both the Bolivian government and the US government. That was something that was led by Evo Morales at the time. And it was out of that struggle that people, start to question how society can be made anew. But just like you can't have a purely electoral party, I think the MAS was also created as a rebuttal against those who said that, we can only trust in activism and social struggle and politics is, an inherently dirty business, and we mustn't engage with it. Evo Morales said, how long are we going to be fighting for this local issue or that local issue? Maybe we'll win one or two times. Maybe we'll have support of some NGOs that will back us over this human rights violation or that issue that affects our community. But what happens after that? We're still in the same conditions that led to that injustice taking place. The only way we can put a solution to this is by taking power. Yeah. So that's why they rejected those who, sought to build a purely electoral vehicle. And because when you build such a vehicle, it's a vehicle for middle class interests. But they also rejected those sort of more ultra left elements that wanted to reject politics, wanted to reject elections and electoral participation. That was what the winning strategy was.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, we're having a sort of similar debate in this country, and you may or may not know that myself and others, we've been working together, hampered considerably, obviously, by the COVID pandemic, to try and build a grassroots social movement. And I feel very passionately we need to really replicate it as best we can in the UK. The sort of approach that the movement towards socialism delivered under the guidance of Evo Morales, but it's obviously not just about one individual. In order to create that strength in depth, and what I was hopeful when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party and was working very hard to try and bring about greater democracy inside the Labour Party, was that we could bring about a situation where we had sort of participatory democracy in the Labour Party, with a view to then empowering, communities to democratise the economy. And it's like Nye Bevan, the great socialist and founding father of the National Health Service, once said, the purpose of getting power is to give it away. And regrettably, people, like you say, really, who set up political parties, they get power, but they want to kind of keep it for themselves, and they sort of dispense goodly works. And it's not about, it seems to me, empowering people. And what's so wonderful, I think, about the Bolivian experience is that that has been done, and huge strides, and we'll perhaps talk a little bit about that as we go along, were made in terms of the economic growth in the country, and how that was then shared amongst the wider populace. But that even after the coup, they were able to, because they had that strength in depth. And I think you've made the point, Ollie, that were it not for that fact that they had this movement, if we were just simply relying on an electoral political party, just sort of sent people into parliament, coming back from a coup in less than 12 months in the way that they did would have probably been impossible. But I think there were not even certain lessons of the importance of solidarity, even in Bolivia itself, I think, because I remember reading, I think it was the miners' union there had said that when pressure was being applied on Evo Morales to step down, I believe the miners' union there even said initially that he should reflect on resigning, if doing so would be good for the good of the country. And it seems to me there's a lesson there, and a lesson that I think we ought to have learned in this country, that you don't give your enemies an inch, because when you give them an inch, they take a mile. Is that something that you would agree with? Is that something you think there's a lesson that even in Bolivia, with all the wonderful examples that you've spoken about, that was maybe a salutary lesson perhaps at the start of this process?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the leader of the miners' union, Juan Huarachi. After that, a few months after that, he said he regretted, suggesting that Evo Morales step down, because, the idea that people would, the forces of imperialism, the right-wing forces within the country, were only worried about Evo Morales as a person were very false. They wanted to destroy him because he represented something that existed very deep in Bolivian society, the political movement for the nationalization of natural resources, for building anti-colonial alliances within Latin America. So I think a lot of people, certainly learned their lessons. Something I think was quite interesting during the year of struggle was just that the fact that people never sought to reconcile, never sought to come together with the forces that had led the coup. They saw themselves as outside that entire political process, and never for a moment sought to engage with it. And that's something that was incredibly important to keep the flame of resistance and of people's confidence alive.
Yeah. And I wonder if you could say a little bit as well, Ollie. I mean, obviously there's huge strides, as I was just alluding to a moment ago, in Bolivia in those 14 years or so before the coup. What kind of improvements were made? How did they?
Hello, sorry.
Yeah, we got you back.
Can
Yeah.
you hear me now?
Yes, we can, mate. Yeah. I was just saying, Ollie, I mean,
Hello?
in the 14 years before the coup, just give us a sense of the changes that were brought about in those 14 years in terms of economic growth and the redistribution of income and wealth and so on in that country. Can you hear us? Oh, I think we've lost Ollie for a moment. Can you hear me now, Ollie? Hello? Just bear with us, viewers. Can you hear me, Ollie? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear us, Ollie? We can hear you fine. I don't know, you don't look like you can hear me. I wonder if I don't know if our technical people can help out. Hello? No, I think we've lost Ollie here.
Would you like to introduce the clip, Chris, and then we
Yeah,
can?
that might be a way. Just while we're trying to get back there, there were some really inspirational personal stories, really personal triumphs that it's incredibly uplifting to see. One of which was a woman called Patricia Arce. She was a socialist mayor. And at the start of the coup, she was, well, the town hall was attacked by a mob, and she was in fear of her life. And there's a rather chilling and troubling video that was taken at the time. But we'll just show you this video now, and there is a very kind of hopeful outcome to that. So let's just watch that video now if we can.
¡Asesina de mierda! ¡Has matado a gente quinacoleña, carajo! ¡Quinacoño se respeta, carajo! ¡Has matado a gente de Quinacoño, mierda! ¡Se respeta, carajo! ¡Desrodíllate! ¡Desrodíllate! ¡Debería caminar! ¡Se respeta, carajo! ¡Asesina de mierda! ¡No graben! ¡No graben! ¡No graben! Los pueblos milenarios somos la nueva generación. Los pueblos milenarios somos la nueva generación. Unidos juntos como hermanos, levantamos nuestra nación.
Have we got Ollie back, Gaz? Hi, Ollie, can you hear us now? Hello? Still not got Ollie.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ollie. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? No? Hello? Hello? Oh, this is a shame. We were just showing the video there of Patricia Arce, who was dragged through the town there and daubed with paint, had a haircut by the right-wing mob, but then was just less than a year later elected as a senator, which is an incredibly uplifting story. But you're not hearing us, are you, Ollie? That is a real shame. I wonder whether we might have to abandon this evening's program and maybe try and get Ollie back on a different, on a better line on another occasion. That's a real shame because it is a really important story what happened in Bolivia, and I think offers us some real hopeful pointers for the future in terms of how we might be able to prevail against the odds in this country. When I know a lot of us are very disappointed with the defeat of the Corbyn project inside the Labour Party. When you look at the challenges that were faced by the Bolivian people, it wasn't just the disappointment of an election defeat and saboteurs inside their own political party. This was the might of the United States of America being involved in a military coup, and people came together, the trade union movement, the wider civil society, to stand up against this and to demand new and fresh elections. And what happened was an incredible turnaround. I mean, Evo Morales had won that election back in 2019, fair and square. But then there was, on a pretext, arguments about alleged electoral fraud and so on, demands that he should step down from office. And regrettably, there were some calls even inside Bolivia, as we were just saying there before we lost Ollie, on calling on Evo Morales to, if it was felt to be for the good of the country, that he should step down and fresh elections be called. But he did step down. He had to leave the country. New elections weren't then held, and it was only because of the concerted efforts of the Bolivian people, the movement towards socialism, which is embedded in every single community throughout the land, that they were able to force the hand of the right-wing dictatorship, effectively, that had been put in place, as they didn't want an elections to hold fresh elections. And then they won by an enormous margin. I think that the margin of victory was something like 25 to 30%. So the socialists swept back to power because there was an outpouring of revulsion against what had happened and support for the program that the socialists were putting forward. So what I think that demonstrates is that there is a real strength in depth in Bolivia, and it shows the benefits of building a movement in the country and not putting all our eggs into an electoral basket in that sense. And if we can achieve that, then I think there's every reason to hope and expect that we can turn things around in the UK as well, and and bring about the sort of change that many of us were hoping would happen through the Corbyn project. I see we've got Ollie back on screen. I don't know if you can you hear me now, Ollie?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm really sorry about this. The internet becomes intermittent in these parts.
Well, you're in Bolivia, aren't you, at the moment? Is that correct? Am I right there? Or
Yeah.
So wonders of technology. It's great to have you. I was just saying, I don't know if you saw the video that we put up on screen, Ollie, whilst we'd lost your connection for a while. It was of the socialist mayor, Patricia Arce, who I think you've met and interviewed, where she was forced to walk through the street, dragged through the street, daubed with paint, had petrol thrown on her, beaten, and but the silver lining to all that was, as we can see with these two pictures here, she came back, was elected as a senator, I believe. But perhaps you could pick up the story, Ollie, because you've spoken to her directly, and tell us what happened, and tell us particularly about the happy ending.
Yeah, I think it's an extraordinary story of bravery, and it's something that I think should show people to never back down against bullies, against thugs. And she is. Last year, in 2019, she was the mayor of a small town called Vinto, is near the city of Cochabamba. And armed fascist groups went from the city into her town, pulled her out of her office, ordered her to resign and to make a statement calling for the resignation of Evo Morales. She refused to do both of those things. So they tortured her. They made her walk across broken glass. They told her that they were walking her to her death. And even under those circumstances, she refused.
Well, Ollie, I mean, walked across broken glass in her bare feet, I believe.
Yes, in her bare feet. That's right. In fact, when they were cutting her hair, they took out a chunk of her skull. She was left with serious injuries. And yeah, they informed her that we're taking you to be killed. And even in the face of that, she refused to back down. She refused to, be intimidated by these people. And the nightmare didn't stop with that. For the whole year under the coup government, for almost the whole of 2020, she was persecuted by the government. When I interviewed her during the election campaign, she said she had 17 criminal charges hanging over her at that moment. For things such as terrorism, sedition, absurdities. But she had to live a whole life with that fear.
Yeah.
And on the day of the election, I remember a friend of mine rang Patricia Arce and said that she couldn't speak. She was she was in tears. She was saying that, you know, for the first time in a year, I'm going to be able to go to bed and, you know, not safe in the knowledge that I'm not going to get a knock on the door in the morning from, you know, some security forces wanting to take me away. And I think she sacrificed an enormous amount during the past year, but now she's a senator. Now she's one of the leading voices in the country, in the legislature, in parliament. So I think that shows that there are fruits of struggle. If you do commit to something, and if you do refuse to back down, you know, whether it comes, you know, after a short while or after a long while, there will be an opportunity to overcome it and to remake the country, and to ensure that those sorts of injustices never happen again. But it does require nerves of steel. You know, if the mass was full of people just looking for cushy jobs, they could have very easily turned to the right, kept their jobs in government, and you know, paid their bills like that. But no, I think most people were committed to the cause, even when it came at a great personal cost. And now, of course, people are reaping the benefits. But it would have been impossible without the enormous sacrifice that so many people gave. And I think that's true not just in Bolivia, but in every country. Deep social change will, of course, require enormous sacrifice, and you have to have people ready, people with, you know, the nerves of steel, ready to go down that path.
But I think it's also a message about the importance, as we were saying earlier, of solidarity, people standing together. I mean, if they'd not stuck together, and an incredible sacrifice that Patricia, is just one example, made. Other people, as we know, lost their lives. But it was because it wasn't just the odd individual here and there. It was a mass of people standing together. I mean, that's what was so inspiring and what was so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's collective politics. I think in the West, even left-wing political circles are used to doing politics on an individual basis. You know, you declare yourself, oh, I'm a this or I'm a that. Yeah. But in Bolivia, what we saw was, I mean, throughout the campaign, I visited a huge number of working class communities in the cities and indigenous rural areas as well. And what you saw in those places was that everyone supported the mass, every single person, and people didn't see it as their personal vote. You know, I've decided as a person to vote for this party or that party. They saw it as a decision that was made at a community level, at a collective level. And you know, the right in Bolivia, liberal sections of the country would say, this is sort of collectivism and authoritarianism, because if you're in those communities and you try, you know, you speak for another candidate, for another party, you end up getting shunned by the community. And that's true. But it's also part and parcel of collective politics, what one might call democratic centralism. But the fact that working class politics don't happen on the same way that you know, ruling class politics happen. No. And in the Conservative Party, or, you know, right-wing parties around the world, it's about an agglomeration of individuals, of certain interests. They get what they can. They stay for as long as those interests are served. They leave when those interests are not served. Yeah. But I think if you want to build working class politics, it's about building that collective sense and appealing to the collective sense as well. So I think it's important to not, you know, be pushed into these sort of subcultural paths, and always have in mind that what you're trying to do is you know, what the mass has achieved is to, you know, be able to go into communities and have the whole community respond positively because they feel part of the organization. And you know, you don't achieve that by you know, individual posturing and things like this. You do it by, you know, the long hard work of building struggle at the grassroots level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly encouraged. Everything you're saying, Ollie, it's kind of music to my ears, because it's absolutely the sort of thing that we've been arguing that we need to try to achieve in this country. But just before we lost your signal, Ollie, I was just asking you if you could maybe give us a little bit of a background as to the sort of changes that were brought about in those 14 years or so before the coup took place. Because, you know, you don't kind of win that kind of mass support just by, you know, saying to people, you know, we're the good guys. I mean, there was some real practical changes that were brought about, wasn't there? And perhaps you could just give us a sense of and the flavour of what was achieved in those 14 years.
Yeah, I think that's another thing I think leftists around the world should look to, not just how the masses built as a party, but also how they governed in power. And I think it leaves an approach and a model that I think should be adopted around the world. And when they took power in 2005, that's when Evo Morales was first elected. Bolivia was the poorest country in the hemisphere, the highest rates of poverty in the hemisphere. What we have now, since that time, Bolivia became the fastest growing economy in Latin America in 2019. Just before, when the coup took place, Bolivia was the fastest growing economy in South America. The economy during 14 years had tripled in size. The national minimum wage had gone up more than 4 times. And that was something that's in real terms above inflation. The unemployment was the lowest rate in the region. Poverty, extreme poverty, was cut in half. General poverty was cut from 2/3 of the country was living below the poverty line in 2005. That was cut to 30% after 13 years. And that's, you know, those aren't just statistics. You know, that's the lives of millions of people who lived in very difficult conditions before. They lived without access to internet, without access to basic services, but who after, you know, 13, 14 years in power were able to access those things. But how does a government go about doing that, delivering things like that? And I think there's a tendency among certain sections of the left to say, oh, you know, government should just spend more. But the question is, how can a government spend more? How can a government get resources to be able to go out and pay for things? The government cannot simply just build up limitless debt or, you know, print money to do things. The government has to actually have solvency and have an income with which to do this. So how does the government have a proper income? That's a difficult thing in a country like Bolivia, where most people don't pay income tax because most people work in the informal economy. The rich people in Bolivia, for a start, aren't particularly rich, and for another, you know, are very good at dodging their taxes. So just a sort of social democratic liberal approach to, oh, we should just raise taxes or tax the rich, that's not a sufficient approach. What the mass did was nationalize natural resources, and not just resources, but strategic industries, and, you know, the airlines, telecommunications, a number of initiatives in public transport, and they created new state companies and new manufacturing companies that were controlled by the state. And the profits from those companies went to the public purse, and then that money could be used to then build roads, to build schools, hospitals, etc., various development programs. And without that revenue, the government could have never have achieved what it wanted to. So without that model of nationalizing the key industries of the country, it's impossible to really invest in the public and development in a serious way. And I think that's true around the world. I think it's a defeatist idea to just say, oh, the government should just should raise money by taxing the rich. I think that there are other ways in which a government can raise revenue, more creative ways. And
absolutely.
In fact,
absolutely. I mean, and obviously in Britain, we're in as an economy, a stronger economy, bigger economy, with a sovereign currency. You know, there are other options which weren't available, I think. So, you know, in many ways, getting a progressive government, socialist government in office in this country, I mean, they're more available than were available to Bolivia.
Certainly, but also I think if you have a strategy based purely around raising taxes on the rich, you're accepting a model in which there are a few people with enormous wealth at the top and a mass of people who need government support paid for through the taxes of the elites. I think actually if we want to challenge neoliberalism on a deep level, we have to challenge the neoliberal model. The neoliberal model of free market ownership, of the idea that the key industries that are strategic for a country to operate, the idea that they should be in private hands rather than public hands is absurd. Things such as airline, telecommunications, water, gas, these are things that should be part of an integrated national strategy for a country's well-being, and that can also something that can bring revenue for the country. So I think that's I don't think you're challenging neoliberalism if you're not challenging the model of the free market and of private ownership.
No, absolutely. I mean, and regrettably in the UK now, we've got two neoliberal parties, really two sides of in terms of the mainstream parties anyway, two sides of the same.
Absolutely.
Same two sides of the same neoliberal coin. I mean, interestingly, I mean, one of the points, I mean, I'm a sort of advocate of modern monetary theory, which I think we can apply in this country. And so taxes, do not actually pay for our public services in this country. We can generate the resources, we can generate the funds. We need taxes to deal with inequality, to the grotesque levels of inequality, to drive behavior change, to deal with inflationary pressures, things like that. But certainly, I think the way we organise the economy. Interestingly, there's some of the points that you were making there in relation to controls of the key elements of the economy was very much the line that was being adopted by that 1974 to 79 Labour government, and certainly under the alternative economic strategy in this country, led by people like Tony Benn, and with North Sea oil revenue coming on stream, and of course all of that was squandered. Sold off to the private sector, and many of the kind of advances that could have been made in this country were never made because it was used to generate profits for the private sector. An absolutely absurd state of affairs. But I just want to move on because we haven't got that much time left, Ollie. But one of the other elements which struck me about Bolivia, and it's interesting because the British left have been quite happy really to kind of get behind the struggle in Bolivia, to a much greater extent than we've perhaps seen them doing so in terms of supporting, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and so on. And one of the things I think which kind of links the struggle in Bolivia and Venezuela and other Latin American countries, and indeed other nations around the world, particularly developing nations, is the anti-imperialist struggle. And certainly, from what I understand, the movement towards socialism, Evo Morales, was a very strong anti-imperialist, and I noticed Evo Morales. In fact, I shared his tweet just the other day. In fact, I think we can put it up on screen now, where he's expressing solidarity with the Iranian people and the Soleimani, the Iranian general who was assassinated on the orders of Donald Trump's administration, which may raise one or two eyebrows. But the thing that the Iranian people have in common with the Bolivian people, and the reason why he was, expressing his support for Qasem Soleimani, is that anti-imperialist struggle. Iran is another nation which is a victim of the imperialist sanctions which are being imposed. And I wonder whether you could maybe say a little bit about that as well, Ollie, just in terms of that anti-imperialist struggle and why that's so important, and why the British need to kind of get that. And I don't think they do quite at the moment, or not enough of them anyway.
Well, it's tremendously important, particularly for issues such as economic development. Countries such as Bolivia, Venezuela, the countries that have been, attacked by the United States. The US has attempted to put sanctions, attempted to isolate these countries, to, retard economic development as a means of defeating socialism internally. But something that has been able to overcome overcome those attacks has been Global South cooperation, solidarity. So particularly under Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, they created new mechanisms for Latin American integration and economic cooperation that didn't depend on the United States. Because any international organisms such as the OAS, in which there is Latin American countries and the United States and Canada, there's a clash of interests, because on the one hand, the United States is looking for economic growth, is looking to take the resources of Latin America, and the interest of Latin America is to protect those resources. So how can you have, how can they speak with one voice when the interests collide? So what Hugo Chavez proposed with the creation of things such as UNASUR, ALBA, was that we have our own interests. The global South, countries that are fighting colonialism have our interests, and we must cooperate, integrate our economies, show solidarity between our countries. And that's the only way that we can overcome the attacks that there are by countries such as the United States. And in the case of Iran and Bolivia, there's a very interesting history behind that. In the tropical Cochabamba, for example, there's a number of milk factories, state-owned milk factories that will produce milk that are sent to working class families as part of a sort of subsidy program. But those milk factories were built with investments, government investments from Iran. However, Iran doesn't own those factories. They don't earn a profit from those factories. It was part of an economic agreement, and those factories now belong to Bolivia. And the same is true of Bolivia currently has a satellite in space that helps provide internet connection to rural areas of the country. And that satellite was built by China. However, China did not demand ownership of the satellite. It's owned by Bolivia. So these forms of mutually beneficial cooperation is something that is alien to countries such as the United States or the UK, who only engage with countries when they can do it on a basis of domination. This sort of solidarity and economic cooperation on the basis of anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism is crucial. I mean, if you go to Cuba, for example, to the city of Havana, most of the new buses come from China, because Cuba would find it incredibly difficult to import modern technology and modern vehicles from others. But China stepped in and allows people to get about their daily lives. Imagine if that didn't exist. It'd be an incredibly difficult situation for ordinary people. So this is vital, and it's precisely this sort of cooperation that the US is trying to break down.
Absolutely. And what I find incredibly frustrating is the almost complete absence in the corporate media in this country of those really positive stories, about Iran, about China and so on, about Cuba. I mean, all we ever hear is kind of negative stories. It's a completely perverted view of the reality in that sense, and very, frustrating to have to, put up with this nonsense, because it does have an impact, I think, on people's opinions, which is why, programs like this and the internet, etc., where people have got access to alternative forms of information is so important. And just on the point, actually, that you meant, you talked about Hugo Chavez and Venezuela, and it's interesting that the European Union, I think it's just been announced on your former employer, Telesur, today. I saw breaking news that they've stopped, they've de-recognized the imposter Juan Guaido, the pretender to the presidential throne, as it were, there, which never stood for a presidential election, declared himself president. And then he was recognized by the UK, recognized by the EU, recognized by the United States. Absolute absurdity. And I mean, that was it's quite an amusing little anecdote, I thought. If you've got any comments about that, Ollie.
Yeah, well, I remember when this first started and Juan Guaido first declared himself president of Venezuela, and the EU, which I think a lot of people see as a sort of bastion of sort of liberalism and human rights and things, they supported this coup attempt. And at the time, I remember Donald Tusk, who was then president of the EU Commission, sort of posted a statement in solidarity, recognizing Juan Guaido as president. And I thought, this is absurd. I mean, just one unelected, essentially a head of state. I mean, Donald Tusk, as a president of the EU Commission, is an unelected role, but which holds enormous power, showing solidarity with another unelected head of state. So then this is, the EU, I think, showed its real side. The EU doesn't have a foreign policy independent of the United States. However, on this issue of Guaido, 2 years on, it's an absurdity to try and keep this fantasy alive. It's self-defeating, even I think for the Venezuelan right, to maintain this charade. So I think the countries, a number of forces are quietly, I think, withdrawing their support, and I think the Venezuelan rights allies within Latin America are also being undermined. Bolivia, the coup government of Bolivia, of course, immediately recognized Juan Guaido as president. That now is gone. Bolivia now has a democratic government which recognizes President Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate elected president. And in a few months, we have elections in Ecuador, where the right-wing president, Lenín Moreno, is not even standing, and the left-wing Correísta candidate, Andrés Arauz, is #1 in the polls. So that's another ally that they could lose, and another ally that the Bolivarian revolution could gain. There's also elections in Peru, in Chile as well. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, hopefully this will be we can close this particularly strange chapter in Latin American history.
Yes, I certainly hope so, and it is incredibly encouraging as well to hear that news about Ecuador and so on. I mean, another Carrera again, incredible improvements that were made, and of course, Lenín Moreno was his deputy, and I think a lot of us hoped that when he was elected, that legacy would continue. But then, of course, we know what went, went sort of pear-shaped, as it were, there. But
he's a Keir Starmer.
Say again, sorry.
He's a Keir Starmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keir Starmer sat alongside Jeremy Corbyn for many months.
Tell me about it. Yeah, indeed. I mean, one of the things that I look to and hope for is that there will come a time when we can get a socialist government elected, a genuine socialist government elected in the UK, and we can then develop and build those strong relationships, with the global South, with Bolivia, with Cuba, and these other countries that we've, Venezuela and China and the rest of it, We don't have to be in hock to the United States of America. There is an alternative way, and against all the odds, I mean, places like, Bolivia, Cuba, all the countries that we just mentioned there, have been plotting a course and have been successful. And it's fantastic to see and really uplifting. And it's been wonderful speaking to you tonight, Ollie. But let me just now, if I can, bring in Sean, who's been monitoring the comments online as the discussion has flowed. And hopefully we managed to keep people with us when we lost Ollie's signal. People didn't feel that was the end of the show and left us. But do we have any comments at all, Sean, from our viewers this evening?
We do, yes. First of all, I'd just like to wish Happy New Year to everybody on the chat. We've got quite a few regulars in there: Liz, Mark, Kevin, Shamsha, Asha. Too many to mention. Jack, Stephen. So hi to all of them. Hi to Angela, who's joined us on Facebook. Thanks for all your comments and the chat this evening. Can I ask you to like, subscribe and hit the bell button for notifications on YouTube, and hit our like button on Facebook, as this gives our posts a little bit more of a lift, and it gets our message out to more people. Ollie, thanks for a really interesting chat this evening. Everybody's been absolutely enthralled by what you've had to say. We've got a few comments and questions that's come through. John says, Elon Musk confesses to the lithium coup in Bolivia. What does this sort of statement make Bolivians think of the neoliberal attitude and threat?
Yeah, I think people were enormously offended at that at the time, but in some ways people were relieved to get proof, evidence of what they've been saying for a very long time. Finally, just a few weeks ago, in fact, I was in the town of Uyuni, which is where all the lithium is based in Bolivia. They have these amazing salt flats that go across for miles. And everyone in this town knows Elon Musk's name. They certainly didn't before. But they, for a whole year, have been fighting against the privatization of the country's lithium. When the government's head of the lithium company, the coup government's head of the lithium company, came to their town, they surrounded the airport and wouldn't let them leave. They fought the whole year for this, and to finally get evidence that they can present of what's really going on, people were happy to have that, and they bring it up whenever you speak to them. And Evo Morales himself, when he came back, he, in his return speech on his first day back, pulled out a folder with all these things and read them out to people. So I think it's something that had a huge impact in the country. And actually, Elon Musk then deleted the tweet after doubling down on it initially, because I think people were telling him, look, you've angered a huge number of people, and you're damaging your own allies in the coup government in Bolivia. So he backtracked a little bit on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Ollie. Liz Robbo, she says, could you please ask if they are worried about America, and are they back saying staying strong with Venezuela?
On Venezuela, absolutely. Just yesterday, Bolivia's head of the Senate and head of the House of Deputies, both of whom are of the MAS, obviously, they traveled to Venezuela to attend the opening of the new legislature in Venezuela. Venezuela recently had elections. They elected a new parliament. And Juan Guaido in the US are trying to not recognize these as legitimate elections because Chavismo, because the left won. So Bolivia, representatives of the MAS traveled to Venezuela, as a show of support for what's going on there. And that's incredibly important, because I think a lot of journalists in the international press were hoping that without Evo Morales, the MAS would maybe shift to the right, like the party did in Ecuador under Lenin Moreno. However, they've shown that that's not the case. Bolivia's rebuilt relations, full diplomatic relations with Venezuela. And in fact, just the day after Luis Arce was sworn in as president, the foreign minister of Venezuela was in La Paz in Bolivia, and he went to the Venezuelan embassy, which had been taken over by Juan Guaido. He tore down Juan Guaido's portrait, threw it on the floor, and placed Simón Bolívar's portrait in its place. So I think that's, those ties are definitely there. But of course, the threat of the United States is also present still. And, throughout Evo Morales' period in power, they were constantly funding right-wing extremist groups to cause violence on the streets, attack indigenous people. And that's not something that's gone away. The operation that the National Endowment for Democracy has, funding right-wing groups in Bolivia, is of course still intact. Funding entire media outlets is still intact. So we need to, certainly remain vigilant of that threat. The Bolivian right is defeated and is divided, but it only takes a few people to destabilize a country. The protests against Evo Morales were very small numbers of middle and upper class people. They managed to throw the country into chaos and pave the way for a military coup. So you can never be overly confident and overly sort of triumphalistic, I think, ever in politics.
Yeah. Just before I ask the last couple of questions, I'd just like people to remind people that they can join the Festival of Resistance or Resist Movement on www.resistmovement.org.uk/memberships. Just the last couple of questions, Ollie. Kevin is asking, is the army now on side in Bolivia? And Angela asks, what steps would Ollie recommend we undertake to try and convince the British public that socialism is good, bearing in mind people are being drip-fed lies on a daily basis by the establishment?
On the question of the military, there's been a change. They sacked all of the military officers that took part in the coup when the MAS won. Sacked all the military officers that were in the coup, sacked all the people who were promoted by the Áñez government, and placed the more democratic faction that exists within the military. This doesn't, I think, mean that the entirety of the institution has been reformed or put right. That's something that will take a very long time. But the fact that that work has started is important. And it shows, I think, that no serious left-wing movement can take power without changing those functions of the state, without issues, things such as the police, the military. They exist to protect ruling class interests under capitalism. So those things do have to be transformed if you're trying to build a new transformational government. And those institutions will act as a dead weight when you try to make serious changes. So there have to be reforms, and it's good that that process has started. It's certainly not completed. And you know, I hope the whole of this, the chat that we've had, Chris, can help people to bring the arguments for socialism in their own countries, whether it's people watching in the UK or elsewhere. And I think Bolivia stands as something, as evidence of that. It's a country that under neoliberalism, under the privatization, the mass privatizations of the 1990s and early 2000s, became the poorest country in the whole of the Americas. And then after nationalizing public natural resources, after nationalizing sort of key manufacturing and transport industries, and using that for the benefit of ordinary people, it became the fastest growing economy in the entire region. And it's something that benefits even the private sector, to build roads, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build a working public transport infrastructure, something that boosts the private sector as well. But doing that was never possible under the neoliberal approach. It was only possible by the state taking a role in the economy to benefit ordinary people. And it brought millions of people out of poverty in Bolivia. And I hope that example can be used by people when making an argument for socialism.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, thanks very much indeed, Ollie. I think we're out of time, actually. We're just slightly over time. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. Thank you. Sean, did you want to just come back and say something there? You got your hand up in the air. I think we've lost Sean now. No, she's gone. Let me thank you, Ollie. Really appreciate you taking the time out. Sorry we lost your signal a little bit, but the wonders of modern technology, we managed to get you back. And your comments, I think, were incredibly encouraging and inspirational for us, and have given us some pointers, I think, to what we need to try and achieve in this country as well. So really appreciate your time. Thanks very much. All power to your elbow. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep giving us those briefings, those updates on what's happening in Bolivia. And hopefully we can have you back on again, maybe at some point in the future, to let us know what the latest developments are. I don't know if you've got any final comments you want to make, Ollie, before we sign off.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Chris, for having me on and helping, spread the word about what has been going on in Bolivia, and keep up the work. I think is incredibly important in the UK that people both, whether in the Labour Party, more importantly outside the Labour Party, are building grassroots media. I think without media, without good communications, we're dependent on the media of the ruling class. We're dependent on outlets such as the BBC or the Guardian, who worked for 2 years, for 3 years, to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, to destroy the hope that there was in millions of ordinary people for for a new world. So I think your work in Resistant TV is very important, and all my support. Thank you, Chris.
No, thank you very much indeed, and hopefully we can reinforce the message that international solidarity is absolutely key, and the importance of anti-imperialism cannot be overemphasized. So thank you very much indeed, Ollie. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's broadcast. I certainly have, notwithstanding the technical difficulties that we had, but I'm sure you'll agree that Ollie was a brilliant guest. It's wonderful to see what's happening in Bolivia. It really is an uplifting story to see that in less than a year, with all the might of the United States, that the Bolivian people, the socialists in Bolivia, were able to prevail and come back into power. So that should give us hope that we can actually bring about change in this country as well. So thanks again for listening. I hope you'll join us next week. Thanks and good night.